Clara loved the quiet rustle of pages in the library. It was a world away from the clanging pots and sizzling pans she sometimes saw on TV. Her favorite meals were simple: a grilled cheese sandwich, a bowl of tomato soup, maybe some pasta with pesto. Fancy restaurants? No, thank you. All those strange ingredients and complicated names just made her nervous. She worked at the Sunny Creek Library, helping kids find their favorite books and organizing shelves. Her clothes were practical, comfortable sweaters and sensible shoes. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. Clara just wanted to live a peaceful life, surrounded by stories and the comforting aroma of old books. Little did she know her quiet world was about to be turned upside down. Her friend, bless her well-meaning heart, thought Clara needed a little excitement, a little spice. And she was about to get a whole lot more than she bargained for, thanks to a certain television show and a very demanding chef. A chef who was about to learn a very important lesson about judging a book by its cover. Now, Chef Ramsay Sterling, on the other hand, was anything but quiet. He was a culinary whirlwind, a storm of sharp knives and even sharper words. His Michelin stars weren't just awards, they were badges of honor earned through years of relentless dedication and brutal honesty. His TV show, Culinary Combat, was a ratings juggernaut, famous for its impossible challenges and Chef Sterling's, let's just say, colorful critiques. He expected perfection. Anything less was met with a volcanic eruption of frustration. He'd yell, he'd throw things, sometimes, and he'd definitely let you know exactly what he thought of your cooking abilities. He saw himself as a culinary artist, weeding out the pretenders and pushing the talented to their absolute limits. And he had a knack for spotting the weakest link in the kitchen, the one he could break with a single, cutting remark. He was a master of culinary intimidation, and tonight, he had a new target in his sights. A certain librarian who looked like she'd rather be reading a book than holding a whisk. The invitation had arrived disguised as a regular piece of mail. Clara almost tossed it, thinking it was junk. But her friend, Emily, had written a little note on the envelope. Open me. Huge surprise. Inside was a golden ticket. Not to a chocolate factory, but to something far more terrifying in Clara's eyes. Culinary Combat. Emily, knowing Clara's quiet life needed a jolt, had secretly signed her up. She envisioned Clara blossoming under pressure, discovering a hidden talent. She imagined Clara dazzling the judges with some secret family recipe. What Emily didn't know was that Clara's secret family recipe involved microwaving frozen dinners. Clara felt a wave of panic wash over her. Culinary Combat? The show where chefs screamed and food exploded? She called Emily immediately, her voice trembling. Emily, what have you done? Emily, ever the optimist, brushed off Clara's concerns. It'll be fun. Think of it as an adventure. You'll meet new people, learn new things, and maybe even win a prize. Clara just groaned. Adventure? This was a recipe for disaster. And she was the main ingredient. The studio loomed before Clara like a culinary coliseum. Bright lights glared, cameras whirred, and the air crackled with nervous energy. Contestants, decked out in pristine white chef coats, buzzed around like anxious bees. Clara felt utterly out of place in her simple sweater and jeans. She clutched her purse, wishing she were back amongst the comforting smell of aging paper and ink. Chef Sterling, a towering figure in his immaculate chef whites, surveyed the contestants with a hawk-like gaze. He paused, his eyes landing on Clara. A smirk played on his lips. Well, he boomed, his voice echoing through the studio. What have we here? Looks like someone wandered in from story time. He strolled towards her, his eyes scrutinizing her from head to toe. Tell me, dear, he said, his voice dripping with mock sweetness, have you ever even seen a professional kitchen before? Or are you more accustomed to microwaving leftovers? Clara's cheeks flushed crimson. She wanted to disappear, to become one with the wallpaper. He had already decided she was the weakest link, and the game had only just begun. Today, Chef Sterling announced, his voice booming, you will be creating a croquembouche. A collective gasp rippled through the contestants. Clara just stared blankly. Oh, what now? Images flashed on the giant screen behind him, towering pyramids of cream-filled pastry puffs, drizzled with caramel, adorned with spun sugar. It looked less like food and more like an architectural marvel. Each of you, Chef Sterling continued, a cruel glint in his eyes, will have 3 hours to create a croquembouche worthy of a 5-star patisserie. Begin. The other contestants sprang into action, grabbing ingredients and furiously whisking. Clara stood frozen, overwhelmed. She recognized some of the ingredients, flour, sugar, eggs, but the sheer complexity of the task was paralyzing. A croquembouche? She'd barely managed to bake cookies without burning them. This was like asking her to build a skyscraper out of sugar. Chef Sterling sauntered over, his expression mocking. Having second thoughts, dear? Perhaps you'd prefer a nice cup of tea and a sit-down. Clara swallowed hard. This was going to be a very long 3 hours. Chef Sterling, like a predatory hawk circling its prey, hovered around Clara's workstation. So, he drawled, tell me, librarian, what's your plan of attack? Are you planning to glue the pastry puffs together with library paste? He chuckled, and a few of the other contestants snickered along with him. He then proceeded to give her completely useless and contradictory advice. You need to be precise, exact, but also be creative. Think outside the box, but stick to the classic techniques. He changed the sugar she was using, replacing it with a coarser variety that would make the caramel prone to burning. He helpfully added an extra step to the cream filling, requiring a rare and difficult-to-find ingredient that he knew she wouldn't have. Clara, her hands trembling, tried to follow his instructions, but they were impossible. Each step seemed designed to make her fail. He was setting her up, sabotaging her at every turn. Come on, dear, he sneered, watching her struggle. Is that the best you can do? My grandmother could make a better croquembouche, and she's been dead for 20 years. Clara's eyes welled up with tears. This wasn't just a cooking competition, it was a public humiliation. But then, a memory surfaced. Clara was a little girl standing on a stool in her father's bustling kitchen. The air was filled with the aroma of herbs and spices, the clatter of pots and pans a comforting symphony. Her father, Chef Antoine Dubois, a name whispered with reverence in culinary circles, was patiently showing her how to make crème brûlée. The secret, Clara, he'd said, his eyes twinkling, is not just in the recipe but in the love you put into it. He wasn't obsessed with fancy techniques or complicated presentations. He believed in the power of simple, honest ingredients, treated with respect and care. He taught her the fundamentals, how to properly whisk eggs, how to temper chocolate, how to coax the perfect flavor from a humble carrot. He never pushed her to follow in his footsteps, understanding her preference for simpler things. Cooking should bring joy, ma chérie, he'd say. Not stress. Now, remembering his words, Clara took a deep breath. It was time to forget Chef Sterling's taunts and remember her father's lessons. Time to cook with love, even if it was a croquembouche. Back in the present, Clara took a steadying breath. She ignored Chef Sterling's snide remarks and focused on the task at hand. First, the pastry puffs. Remembering her father's instructions, she carefully measured the ingredients, whisking them together with a newfound confidence. She paid close attention to the texture of the dough, adjusting it until it was just right. The other contestants, initially focused on their own creations, began to glance over at Clara's workstation. They had written her off as a lost cause, but now they saw something different, a quiet determination, a focused intensity. She moved with a surprising grace, her hands knowing exactly what to do. Even Chef Sterling seemed taken aback. He stopped his taunting and watched her, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. He couldn't deny that her pastry puffs looked perfectly golden brown and evenly sized. He still expected her to falter, to crumble under the pressure, but for the first time he wasn't so sure. Something had shifted. The librarian was no longer a pushover. She was cooking. And she was cooking with purpose. While Clara worked with quiet focus, chaos erupted around her. One contestant accidentally set their caramel on fire, sending plumes of black smoke billowing into the air. Another was frantically trying to salvage a curdled cream filling. The pressure was getting to everyone. Clara, however, remained calm. She moved with a serene efficiency, her movements precise and deliberate. She carefully crafted the cream filling, adapting her father's techniques to compensate for the inferior ingredients Chef Sterling had provided. She couldn't find the rare ingredient he'd insisted on, so she cleverly substituted it with a blend of spices that subtly enhanced the flavor. She noticed that several contestants were struggling with the spun sugar, a notoriously tricky element. She remembered her father showing her a simple trick using a fork and a steady hand. With a flick of her wrist, she created delicate, shimmering strands of sugar that looked like spun gold. The other contestants watched in amazement, their own attempts looking clumsy and amateurish in comparison. Clara was not just surviving, she was thriving. Chef Sterling, witnessing Clara's unexpected progress, grew increasingly agitated. He couldn't understand it. He had done everything in his power to make her fail, yet she was not only surviving but seemingly excelling. He decided to ramp up his efforts. He surreptitiously loosened a screw on her stand mixer, causing it to sputter and shake violently. He hoped it would ruin her cream filling. But Clara, with remarkable composure, quickly identified the problem and tightened the screw with a butter knife, barely missing a beat. Next, he swapped her vanilla extract with almond extract, knowing the almond flavor would clash with the spices she was using. But Clara, noticing the subtle change in aroma, subtly adjusted her spice blend to complement the almond, creating an even more complex and intriguing flavor profile. Each act of sabotage only seemed to make her more resourceful and determined. Chef Sterling was starting to sweat. His carefully constructed plan was crumbling before his eyes. He had underestimated the librarian. And he was running out of time. With only minutes left on the clock, Clara began assembling her croquembouche. She carefully dipped each pastry puff in warm caramel, her hands steady and precise. She arranged them in a perfect cone, creating a stunning architectural masterpiece that defied gravity. The spun sugar cascaded down the sides like a delicate waterfall, catching the light and shimmering with ethereal beauty. One of the other contestants, whose own croquembouche had collapsed into a sticky mess, watched Clara with a mixture of envy and admiration. "How did you do that?" she whispered. Clara just smiled, a quiet confidence radiating from her. Chef Sterling, his face a mask of barely concealed fury, watched from the sidelines. He knew in that moment that he had lost. He had underestimated Clara, and now she was about to prove him wrong in front of millions of viewers. He couldn't believe it. The librarian, the one he had pegged as the weakest link, had created the most stunning croquembouche he had ever seen. The buzzer sounded, signaling the end of the challenge. Time was up, and Clara had triumphed. The judges approached the contestants' workstations, their faces carefully neutral. Chef Sterling trailed behind, his expression a mixture of disbelief and simmering rage. The first few croquembouches were met with polite, but unenthusiastic, comments. They were either structurally unsound, poorly flavored, or simply lacked the visual appeal required for such a demanding dessert. Then they arrived at Clara's creation. The judges stopped, their eyes widening in surprise. The kind older woman judge gasped softly. "Magnifique," she whispered. The other judge, a stern-faced pastry chef, circled the croquembouche slowly, his eyes scrutinizing every detail. He ran a gloved finger along the spun sugar, testing its texture. He carefully examined the pastry puffs, noting their even color and perfect shape. He was clearly impressed. Chef Sterling watched, his jaw clenched. He knew what was coming. He had tried everything to break Clara, but she had not only survived, she had thrived. And now her creation was about to speak for itself. It was a masterpiece, a testament to her skill, her creativity, and her unwavering determination. A croquembouche that was simply perfect. Chef Sterling, knowing he couldn't avoid it any longer, reluctantly stepped forward to taste Clara's croquembouche. He took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. He grabbed a small pastry puff from the base of the tower, his movement stiff and unnatural. He brought it to his lips, his eyes narrowed, searching for any flaw, any imperfection. He bit into it. His eyes widened slightly. He chewed slowly, thoughtfully. The camera zoomed in on his face, capturing every nuance of his expression. The studio was silent, everyone holding their breath. He swallowed. He took another bite and another. He couldn't help himself. The flavor was exquisite, a delicate balance of sweet and spice, a perfect harmony of textures. The pastry was light and airy, the cream filling rich and decadent, the caramel crisp and buttery. It was, without a doubt, a culinary masterpiece. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure. "Well," he said, his voice surprisingly subdued, "it's edible." But everyone could see the surprise, the grudging admiration in his eyes. He knew he had to admit it. Clara's croquembouche was exceptional. The kind older woman judge, Madame Dubois, no relation though she felt a connection, smiled warmly at Clara. "My dear," she said, "this croquembouche, it is truly exceptional. The flavors are so nuanced, so delicate. I detect a hint of lavender, perhaps? And a touch of star anise? These are techniques passed down through generations. It reminds me of someone, a master." She paused, her eyes twinkling knowingly. "There is a certain a certain artistry that cannot be taught. It must be inherited." She looked pointedly at Chef Sterling, who shifted uncomfortably. The stern-faced pastry chef nodded in agreement. "The structural integrity is remarkable. The pastry puffs are perfectly cooked, the caramel is flawless. This is not the work of an amateur." He took another bite, savoring the flavors. "There is a whisper of tradition here, a nod to the old masters. This is more than just a dessert, it's a story." A story told in sugar and spice. He looked at Clara with newfound respect. "Tell me, mademoiselle," he asked, his voice softer than before, "where did you learn to cook like this?" Chef Sterling, seeing the writing on the wall, tried to salvage the situation. "Yes, well," he interjected, forcing a smile. "It's certainly passable. But it lacks the edge, the innovation that I look for in a top chef." He was desperately trying to downplay Clara's achievement to maintain his image as the ultimate culinary authority. He added with a dismissive wave of his hand, "It's a nice enough croquembouche, I suppose. A little safe, a little predictable, but hardly groundbreaking." He glanced at the camera, hoping his comments would resonate with the viewers. He needed to regain control of the narrative to convince everyone that he was still the one in charge. But the judges weren't buying it. They exchanged knowing glances, their expressions conveying a silent message, "Nice try, chef. But we know the truth." The audience, too, seemed unconvinced. They had witnessed Chef Sterling's behavior throughout the challenge, his blatant attempts to sabotage Clara. They knew that her success was a triumph over adversity, and they were on her side. The tide had turned, and there was nothing Chef Sterling could do to stop it. Clara, taking a deep breath, stepped forward. "I learned from my father," she said, her voice clear and steady. "He was a chef." Chef Sterling scoffed. "Oh, really? And what little diner did he preside over?" "The Greasy Spoon down the street." Clara smiled, a hint of pride in her eyes. He wasn't exactly known for greasy spoons. His name was Antoine Dubois. A hush fell over the studio. The judges gasped. Even Chef Sterling's jaw dropped. Antoine Dubois? The legendary 3 Michelin star chef? The culinary icon who had revolutionized French cuisine? The man who had mentored some of the world's greatest chefs? Madame Dubois' eyes widened. Antoine? But he was a genius. The stir-faced pastry chef nodded in agreement. His pastry work was legendary. His croquembouche was perfection. Chef Sterling stammered, "Antoine Dubois? But he's..." Clara finished his sentence for him. "He's my father." The camera zoomed in on Chef Sterling's face. The shock, the disbelief, the utter humiliation were plain for all to see. He had just spent the last 3 hours belittling and sabotaging the daughter of a culinary legend. The irony was almost too much to bear. Chef Sterling, speechless with embarrassment, could only stammer, I had no idea." He looked at Clara with newfound respect, mixed with a healthy dose of fear. He had publicly humiliated the daughter of a culinary giant. His reputation was in tatters. He cleared his throat. "Well," he said, trying to regain some semblance of composure, "in that case, congratulations, Miss Dubois. You have clearly inherited your father's talent." He emphasized the word talent with a heavy dose of sarcasm. He continued, however, he added quickly, "Talent alone is not enough. A true chef must also possess drive, ambition, a willingness to push the boundaries." He was desperately trying to find a way to justify his initial assessment of Clara to salvage his reputation. But it was no use. The damage was done. Everyone in the studio knew that he had made a colossal mistake. He had judged a book by its cover, and he had paid the price. He had learned a valuable lesson that day. Never underestimate anyone, especially the quiet ones. They might just surprise you, and sometimes they might just be the daughter of a culinary legend. "And the winner of Culinary Combat," the host announced, drawing out the suspense, "is Clara Dubois." The studio erupted in applause. Confetti rained down. Clara, stunned but smiling, accepted the trophy. Chef Sterling, forced to play along, offered a stiff handshake. "Congratulations," he mumbled, barely meeting her eyes. In her winner's interview, Clara was asked why she had entered the competition. "My friends signed me up," she admitted with a laugh. "But I wanted to honor my father's memory. He taught me everything I know. And he always said that the most important ingredient in any dish is love." She held up the trophy. "This isn't just for me. It's for him." The audience cheered. They loved her humility, her grace, her unwavering dedication to her father's legacy. Clara had won more than just a cooking competition. She had won their hearts. And she had taught Chef Sterling a lesson he would never forget, that true talent comes in many forms and that judging a book by its cover is always a recipe for disaster. Her simple love was her secret ingredient, and it was more powerful than any fancy technique. The next day, Clara was back at the Sunny Creek Library, surrounded by her beloved books. The trophy sat discreetly on her desk, a quiet reminder of her unexpected adventure. Life had mostly returned to normal, except now kids would occasionally ask her for cooking tips and the library's cookbook section was suddenly very popular. Emily, of course, was ecstatic. "I told you it would be fun," she exclaimed, beaming with pride. Clara just laughed. Fun is one word for it. She knew she wouldn't trade the experience for anything. She had faced her fears, honored her father's memory, and proven that even a simple librarian could create something extraordinary. She had also learned that sometimes the greatest adventures come when you least expect them, and that the most important ingredients in life, like in cooking, are kindness, courage, and a whole lot of love. She still preferred grilled cheese, though. And maybe now she'd try making it with a little bit of lavender. Just a touch. As for Chef Sterling, the experience was transformative. He watched the broadcast of culinary combat with a mixture of dread and fascination. He saw himself as the arrogant bully, the man who had underestimated a quiet librarian and disrespected a culinary legend. It wasn't a pretty picture. The next episode of Culinary Combat opened with Chef Sterling addressing the camera, his tone uncharacteristically subdued. "Last week, he began, I made a mistake. I judged a contestant before I knew her story. I let my arrogance cloud my judgment." He continued, "I want to apologize to Clara Dubois. You are a talented chef and you have honored your father's legacy with grace and humility. I was wrong to underestimate you." He then announced a new segment on the show, Hidden Talents, dedicated to showcasing contestants with unexpected backgrounds and hidden skills. He even invited Clara to be a guest judge, an invitation she politely declined. At the end of the episode, as the credits rolled, Chef Sterling was seen quietly washing dishes, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. Perhaps, just perhaps, he had learned a little something about humility, and about the true meaning of cooking. And maybe, just maybe, he'd start being a little nicer. And so, the tale of the librarian and the demanding chef came to a close. It was a story about unexpected talents, about the power of love and memory, and about the importance of not judging a book by its cover or a chef by her sensible shoes. Clara continued to live her quiet life at the Sunny Creek Library, forever grateful for the lessons she had learned. She sometimes experimented with new recipes, adding a touch of her father's flair to her simple dishes. And every now and then she would catch a glimpse of Culinary Combat on TV, smiling to herself as she watched Chef Sterling, a little less arrogant, a little more kind. The world, it seemed, was a little bit brighter, a little bit sweeter, thanks to a librarian who dared to cook with love. And thanks to a chef who finally learned that the most important ingredient is humility. The end.